Story 1. I was 3 years old and my pink bouncy ball had rolled off the pier into the water. I walked off the pier after my ball, but no one was around watching me. I remember standing on the floor of the ocean with the water above my head. I wasn't afraid. Then I was standing above the water watching myself lying on the beach and seeing my parents and other members of my family kneeling over me. They were upset as they were trying to save my life. As I was watching, I realized there was someone beside me. This figure was much taller than me and taller than the average person. The figure felt older and more intelligent than me. I never turned to look at the figure. This figure felt like a guide more than like a family member. It was like we both belonged where we were and we both felt the same way about my family. I felt like I was a higher intelligence who knew more than a 3-year-old should know. I felt like this was the real me and from where I had come. I know I didn't want to go back into my body. I felt nothing for those people on the beach. I knew they loved me and were scared, but I felt I didn't belong with them, and that their existence was confusing, complicated, and much less than my true existence. They didn't have the knowledge I had. I knew where I was standing was real as it felt like home. Both me and the figure next to me had a greater awareness and consciousness than my family by my earthly body. I was completely in the moment. I felt as if I had an understanding of everything. I wasn't afraid, but I knew I didn't want to go back to my body. I didn't look at my parents like they were my mom and dad. I looked at them like I didn't belong with them because I was not one of them. There was a moment when I realized I was going to go back, and I felt that the figure was there to give me the understanding that I needed to go back. Then I heard a very loud clap like a crack of thunder. I was back in my body and surrounded by my family. I was coughing up water and shaking violently. I was wet, cold, and crying as I sought the safety of my family. I didn't think about what had happened until much later. I do remember for many years afterwards that whenever my siblings were bullying me, I would go to my room, cry, and say aloud, "I want to come home. Why won't you let me come home? I don't want to stay here." I would fall asleep and wake up feeling fine. Eventually, all that stopped. But I never forgot that experience. I remember it so clearly, even today. I can still hear the clap and remember how it felt being with the figure beside me. Sometimes I wonder why I didn't see a bright light, feel warm, or have joyful feelings. This story was shared by Janine S. and happened in 1969. Story 2. My near-death experience happened 30 years ago, but I still can remember it as if it happened only yesterday. At the time, I was 14 years old. I had bad bronchitis and hadn't been to school in days. The day I had the near-death experience was on Mother's Day, and my grandparents, with whom I had a very close relationship, came to visit. I was lying down in my bed in my room. I felt very sluggish from the bronchitis and was very apathetic. I can still remember looking at the ceiling when I felt a state of weightlessness. Then I realized that I was floating towards the ceiling. From above, I looked down and saw my body lying in bed. I did not feel afraid. It felt so normal and easy. I felt like I was held, safe, and loved. Then everything around me became very luminously bright, and a warm light pervaded everything. I saw a brightly shining circle whose edges dissolved into soft, yellowish-red colors. In my head, I heard a voice. It told me that I could decide if I wanted to stay forever up here in the light, or if I wanted to go back to my body. I thought about what I wanted to do, and I noticed that below me the door of my room opened. I saw my beloved grandma peeking through to check on me. I suddenly felt that I wanted my heart back in my body because I loved my family so much. Again, I heard the voice in my head. It said, "When you are back in your body, you have to tell your grandma that you need to quickly get to a hospital, otherwise you will not survive." Then everything happened very fast. I left the warm, bright, and safe light and found myself back in my body. To my grandma, I said that I needed to go very fast to the hospital because I felt so bad. I can still remember that my father carried me down the stairs. I collapsed and woke up at the hospital, connected to tubes and a respirator. The doctors said that the bronchitis had developed into a life-threatening pneumonia. I had only 5% oxygen left in my blood. Later on, they said, had I arrived only 15 minutes later at the hospital, I would have died. Since this experience, my grandma and I had an even deeper connection. When she died at almost 90 years of age, a very psychic lady got in touch with me. She told me that in the night when my grandma died, she appeared at her place with a message to tell me. She wanted me to know that where she is now, she is fine, that she is happy to be with Grandpa, and that she loves me very deeply. Since the experience of my near-death, I'm dealing a lot with the soul, with death and near-death experiences of other people. It opened a spiritual way for me that I'm very grateful about. I have lost the fear of dying. This story was shared by Kristen Kay and happened in 1990.
Story 3. My teenage daughter told me that she wanted to be baptized and become a Christian. She also said she wanted to attend a Bible study group that was held by her church. The group was interesting but did not change my agnostic beliefs. Later, I was riding my motorcycle home from the office. It was just after 6 p.m. on a dark, wet night. I could see a vehicle in the distance as it approached the rise onto the bridge at high speed. Then I heard the screeching of tires and I was catapulted into the air. As I was going up, I left my body and had a very quick glance down to my left and saw the accident scene. I was flying horizontally in a very dark space and heading towards a porthole of white light at the end. An image of God was in the light. I felt such peace and joy that it is difficult to describe. The white light was the only place I wanted be. The world below was in the past and I had no regrets. Then I felt a brief moment of angst because I was not getting any closer to the light. I felt God was stopping me. If I was dead down below and couldn't get to the light, then where was I supposed to be? I looked down and to my right. Jesus was standing in the dark space, some distance from me and looking towards the light. I realized in an instant what was happening. In my mind I said to God, "Get me out of this one and I won't come here again without him." Zoom! I was straight down and blended back into my body. The things happening around me seemed a little surreal. I had landed on the white double lines alongside the utility and clear of the oncoming traffic. I stood up and walked back to my motorcycle. The driver who had hit me came up to see if I was hurt, and he started to apologize. The first thought that came into my mind was, "Don't get angry. Jesus wouldn't want it." The only injury I sustained was very heavy bruising over a considerable part of my body. Many months later, the Bible study group moved to my house and continued there for 10 years. I became more interested in caring about people than material things. Over the coming years, I became a volunteer visitor for the church hospital chaplain. I left a long-term career in commercial real estate and became a librarian. I'm not expecting any stop signs when I'm next heading to the white light, as I won't be going there alone. It was 10 years before I told a friend about my experience. This story was shared by Kevin G. and happened in 2003.
Story 4. I had an asthma attack caused by unknown triggers. The attack came on very suddenly. Within the 15 or so minutes it took to get to the hospital, I was down to less than 40% lung function. I had an out-of-body experience where I could see the doctor and nurse working around my body on the table in the emergency room. I was conscious of the fact that they were injecting medications to try and restore lung function, since other medications had failed. But I couldn't feel anything they were doing. Shortly after observing this, I felt the sensation of being lifted upwards. I found myself floating in a void. I had a subconscious sensation of being in space above the earth. The level of alertness I felt was beyond anything I have encountered. I was perfectly aware and more awake than I have ever been in life. I also was aware of exactly what had happened during the asthma attack, going to the hospital and seeing my own body. There wasn't any real positive or negative sensation involved. I had a feeling of peace that any of the problems that I had been dealing with on Earth was finished. I felt that I didn't need to worry about them, as though all of my affairs had been completed and taken care of exactly as they should have been. As I floated in the void, I was also aware that I was not alone. There was another presence with me. I didn't ask who or what they were, but I received a voiceless message from them telling me that they were my oldest friend. They told me their name was Heimdall. I had never heard of that name before. He told me that I would always have what I needed. They did not explain what that meant. I remember asking, "Am I dead?" Shortly after that, I awoke in the hospital. I had been dead for 6 minutes and unconscious for nearly a week. As a teenager, I was mostly angry because the nurse had botched my IV when putting it in. I did not mention my experience to my family because they were extremely religious, and I knew they wouldn't accept what had happened to me. While I wasn't aware of receiving information during the encounter itself, I also woke with the knowledge that I had been shown a series of events that would happen in my future. Most of what I was shown was almost immediately forgotten. As for the statement that I would always have what I need, that has proven true. I've had a lot of ups and downs in my life since the experience, but even under the direst circumstances, I've always had food, shelter, medicine, and whatever else is necessary. Sometimes these things are made available to me through bizarre coincidences or circumstances. This story was shared by Jeanette Yu and happened in 1999.